What I'm about to share is a memory. It is as real to me as the ground beneath my feet. I've spent years turning it over in my mind. I've searched for every logical reason, every simple explanation that could make it all make sense. But honestly, I have found none. This story is true, at least to me. It happened. It left a mark on me that I feel to this day. Sometimes life presents us with moments that defy our understanding. They sit outside the neat boxes we build for our reality. This is one of those moments. It's a quiet mystery that lives in the back of my mind, a question without an answer. The world is full of strange and unexplained things. We hear stories from others, tales of odd lights in the sky, or whispers in an empty house. We often listen with a bit of skepticism. We think, there must be a simple answer. The person must be mistaken, or perhaps they are embellishing the truth for a good story. I used to be that person. I believed that for every mystery there was a key, for every locked door a logical explanation was waiting to be found. But my own experience has humbled me. It has taught me that some doors remain locked and some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only to be lived with. This account is not meant to convince you of anything supernatural, it is simply my honest recollection of events. I have no grand theory about what happened that night. I only have the memory itself, vivid and unyielding. It has stayed with me through the years, as clear as the day it happened. I have questioned my own sanity, my own memory. I have wondered if I dreamed the whole thing, but the details are too sharp, too specific. It feels more real than many other memories I hold. It's a piece of my past that doesn't fit with the rest of the puzzle, and perhaps it never will. So I invite you to listen. I will tell you everything just as I remember it. I will not add anything for dramatic effect. The story is strange enough on its own. It is a simple tale about a young person working a late shift, a brief encounter in a quiet place. But sometimes the simplest stories hold the deepest mysteries. They remind us that the world is far more complex and far more mysterious than we often care to admit. This is my story, the story of the man I met named Michael, and the questions he left behind in the silent hours of a long-ago night. The setting for this story is a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, or so you would think. Our town had one main street, a handful of shops, and a single fast food restaurant that served as a beacon for late-night travelers and local teenagers. It was the spring of 2020. The world was just beginning to grapple with the pandemic. There was a strange quiet that had settled over everything. The streets were emptier than usual. The nights felt longer, more isolated. A sense of uncertainty hung in the air, a feeling that we were all holding our breath, waiting for what would come next. I had just started working at that fast food place. It was my first real job. The work was simple, flipping burgers, salting fries, cleaning the grease traps. The building was old, a standard design from the 1990s that hadn't changed much. It had large plate glass windows that looked out onto the nearly deserted parking lot and the dark road beyond. During the day, it was a place of noise and routine, but at night, especially during that time, it transformed. It became a small, brightly lit island in a sea of darkness and silence. The hum of the freezers and the buzz of the fluorescent lights were the only sounds. The pandemic had changed the rhythm of the place. Our dining room was closed to the public. We served customers only through the drive-through window. This made the nights feel even more isolated. We were a small crew, working in our own little bubble while the world outside felt distant and strange. The quiet allowed you to think. It gave you too much time to notice the little things, the flicker of a light, the sound of the wind against the glass. It was a setting ripe for introspection, a place where the ordinary could easily begin to feel strange if you let your mind wander too far into the shadows. That particular night was no different from any other. The air was cool. The sky was clear and full of stars, the kind you only see when you are far away from the glow of a big city. The late-night rush, which was never much of a rush to begin with, had ended. We were in the final hours of the shift, the time for cleaning and closing. It was in this profound quiet, in this bubble of artificial light surrounded by the deep dark of a small-town night, that my story truly begins. A normal night, in an abnormal time, was about to become something I could never forget. My first week on the job was a blur of new faces and new tasks. I was still learning the ropes, trying my best not to mess up anyone's order. That night my shift was supposed to end at 10 o'clock. My dad was my ride home and he was always punctual. As the clock hands neared 10, I started my closing duties, wiping down the counters and sweeping the floor. I was tired, ready to go home and collapse into bed. The manager, a kind but stressed woman named Sarah, was rushing around trying to get the final tasks done before she could lock up for the night. The restaurant was quiet save for our movements. Just as I was about to clock out, Sarah approached me. She looked apologetic. She explained that one of the closing crew members had called in sick. They were short-staffed and behind on the deep cleaning that had to be done. She asked if I would be willing to stay for another hour or two to help out. She would, of course, pay me for the extra time. I hesitated for a moment. I was exhausted, and I knew my dad was already on his way. But I was new, and I wanted to make a good impression. I did not want to seem lazy or uncooperative, so I agreed. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my dad telling him not to come yet. I told him I would call him when I was finished, probably around midnight. He replied with a simple, "Okay, be safe." I put my phone away and turned back to Sarah, ready for my new instructions. She pointed to a list of tasks on a whiteboard in the back office. It was mostly scrubbing floors and cleaning the heavy kitchen equipment. It was not glamorous work, but it needed to be done. I grabbed a mop and a bucket and got to work, the familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner filling the air. The extra hours passed slowly. The work was tiring and monotonous. Sarah was busy in the office handling paperwork and counting the day's earnings. Another co-worker, a quiet boy named Kevin, was out back, taking care of the trash and cleaning the outside areas. This left me mostly alone in the main kitchen and dining area. The vast empty space felt a little eerie now that the energy of the workday had completely faded. It was just me, the hum of the machinery, and the rhythmic sloshing of water in my bucket. I was just a kid, trying to earn a paycheck, unaware that I was about to encounter something truly strange. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing a stubborn spot on the floor near the drink station, when I heard a soft cough behind me. I turned, a little startled. I had not heard anyone approach. Standing there was a man I had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He was tall and very thin, with a gaunt face that seemed both tired and kind. His hair was a salt and pepper gray, neatly combed. He wore the standard employee uniform, a clean, pressed polo shirt with the restaurant's logo and a pair of dark trousers. He was holding a worn-out baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. He gave me a small, gentle smile. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I'm Michael. I work the night shift here sometimes, just came in to get started." I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron. I introduced myself, explaining that I was new and had stayed late to help close. It seemed odd that I hadn't been introduced to him before, especially if he was a regular night shift worker. But in the chaos of my first week, I figured it was possible that our paths simply hadn't crossed. Small towns are like that. You can live there for years and still meet new people. We spoke for a few minutes. The conversation was simple, unremarkable on the surface. He asked me how I was liking the job. I told him it was fine, just a lot to learn. He nodded in a way that seemed to hold a deep understanding, as if he had heard the same thing from countless new employees over the years. He didn't move from his spot. He just stood there, observing the quiet restaurant with a look of peaceful familiarity. There was an air of stillness about him, a calmness that was almost unsettling in its intensity. He seemed completely at ease in the silent, empty building. His appearance was what I remember most vividly. His face was deeply lined, especially around his eyes, which were a pale, watery blue. They seemed to hold a profound sadness, a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue from a long day. He looked like a man who had seen a great deal in his life. He told me he mostly handled maintenance and deep cleaning tasks that were done overnight when the restaurant was completely empty. This seemed like a plausible explanation. It made sense that a special overnight cleaner would exist, someone who worked outside the normal shift hours. After our brief chat, Michael said he needed to clock in and get to his tasks. He walked over to the old-fashioned time clock we had on the wall in the back office. It was an ancient machine that stamped the time onto thick paper cards. I watched as he took a card from the rack, inserted it into the slot, and the machine made its loud, satisfying ka-chunk sound. He then placed the card back in the rack. Everything he did was slow and deliberate, as if he were performing a ritual he had done 1,000 times before. He then turned back to me, his small, sad smile returning to his face. "Well, it was nice meeting you," he said, extending his hand. I reached out and took it. His handshake was the strangest part of the entire encounter. His hand was shockingly cold, not just cool but icy, like he had been holding it in a freezer. It was a dry, papery cold that seemed to drain the warmth from my own skin. The feeling was so jarring that I almost pulled my hand back, but I held on for a moment out of politeness. His grip was surprisingly firm for someone so thin. It was a handshake that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, a detail that has never faded from my memory. As he let go of my hand, he looked me directly in the eyes. His pale blue eyes seemed to see right through me. "I'll be seeing you around," he said. His tone was not threatening, but it was not entirely friendly either. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with a strange finality. Then he turned and walked silently toward the back storage area, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. I stood there for a moment, the cold sensation still lingering in my palm. The encounter had left me feeling slightly off-kilter, a little unnerved for reasons I could not quite articulate. I tried to shake off the strange feeling. I told myself I was just tired. I had been working for hours and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. The man was just a coworker, perhaps a bit odd but harmless. I finished my cleaning, my mind replaying the short conversation and that cold handshake. When I was finally done, I called my dad. As I walked out into the cool night air, I looked back at the restaurant. I thought about Michael, alone in there, beginning his solitary shift. The brief meeting felt significant, but I had no idea just how significant it would become. The next day, I couldn't shake the memory of Michael. The coldness of his hand, the sadness in his eyes, it all felt too real to ignore. When I went in for my shift that afternoon, I mentioned him to my co-workers. "I met Michael last night," I said casually to Kevin, the boy who had been working with me, the guy who does the overnight maintenance. Kevin just gave me a blank look. "Michael?" he asked. "I don't know any Michael. Sarah and I were the only ones here with you after 10. I felt a knot of confusion tighten in my stomach. Maybe Kevin just didn't know him. I decided to ask my manager Sarah. I found her in the office and described the man I had met. I told her about our conversation, his appearance, everything. She listened patiently, but her expression grew more and more puzzled. "I have no idea who you're talking about," she said, shaking her head. "We've never had an overnight maintenance worker named Michael. We've never had an overnight maintenance worker at all. The morning crew handles all the deep cleaning." Now, my confusion was turning into genuine unease. How could this be? I saw him, I spoke to him, I shook his hand. Over the next few days I became obsessed. I asked every single employee at the restaurant. I described Michael in detail to each of them. No one knew him. No one had ever heard of a coworker named Michael. My family thought I must have been dreaming. "You were exhausted," my dad said. "You probably just dozed off for a minute and had a very vivid dream." But I knew I hadn't been sleeping. I was wide awake, scrubbing a floor. The memory was too clear, too linear to be a dream. It felt like a solid part of my reality, yet everyone around me was telling me it never happened. The feeling was incredibly isolating. It was as if I was the only person who remembered a specific event, while the rest of the world had a different version of history. I started to question my own mind. Was I going crazy? Was this some kind of strange hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue? But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. Michael was real. I knew he was. My search for a simple confirmation had turned into a desperate attempt to validate my own sanity. I felt like I was searching for a ghost that only I had seen. My last hope for a logical explanation was the security footage. If I could just show everyone the video of me talking to Michael, it would prove I wasn't crazy. I asked Sarah if we could review the tapes from that night. She agreed, likely just to humor me and put the matter to rest. We sat in her small office and pulled up the footage. We watched the time-stamped recording of me cleaning the dining area. We saw me get up from the floor. We saw me stand there talking and gesturing to an empty space. There was no one there. On the camera, I was having a conversation with thin air. My heart sank. Then I remembered the time clock. "He clocked in," I said, my voice filled with a desperate hope. "Check the time cards." We went to the rack by the old machine. We sifted through the cards from that night, and there it was. Tucked between the cards for Sarah and Kevin was a card with the name Michael, neatly printed at the top. It had one single solitary punch on it, stamped at 11:47 p.m., the exact time I had met him. Sarah stared at it, her face pale. She had no explanation. She said the card hadn't been there the day before. It was physical proof, yet it made no sense. The card disappeared a few days later as mysteriously as it had appeared. Years have passed since that night. I no longer work at that fast food restaurant, but the memory of Michael has never left me. I am left with a story that has no ending, a puzzle with a missing piece. Was he a ghost? A traveler from another time? A glitch in my own perception of reality? I have no answers. The encounter has changed me. It has made me more open to the idea that there are things in this world that we will never fully understand. It taught me that our own reality is perhaps more fragile and more mysterious than we think. I eventually decided to share my story online, on a Reddit forum dedicated to unexplained mysteries. I laid out all the facts, just as I have told them to you. I wanted to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. I wanted to know if I was alone. The responses were varied. Some offered theories, some shared their own strange tales, and some were skeptical. But in sharing the story, I found a small sense of peace. The memory is still mine, but it no longer feels like a secret I have to carry alone. The question of who or what Michael was remains, and perhaps it always will.